we have enough chairs?
Should I grab a few more?
No, just ask if they're. You guys need some chairs?
We have some up front if you'd like.
We could pull some out in the back.
Hi everyone, my name is Pierce. I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series here at Brookline Booksmith and your host for tonight's conversation. I want to open up the space by saying thank you for coming out tonight. The Booksmith has been around since 1961 and that's because of our wonderful community. Your support means we can keep having events like this, so thank you again. As you may know, tonight's event is part of our ongoing Transnational Literature Series, which focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. If you enjoyed tonight's event, please check out our full events lineup online at brooklinebooksmith.com so you don't miss some of the amazing authors we have coming up this fall, both virtually and in store. And also follow us on Instagram for updates. Toward the end of the event, we'll leave about 15 minutes or so for an audience Q&A, followed by a signing. We have copies of tonight's featured book available over at the register. And please take a moment to silence your cell phones. I think that takes care of the business end of things, and I'd love to tell you a little bit about our guests. Tonight I have the very great honor of introducing Zuzana and Alex here to discuss and honor the release of Playing Wolf, a distinctly poetic and disturbingly elegant horror novel of human destiny and discovering the animal in each of us. It is a dark beauty, a brutal and violent novel, but one that ensnares. Zuzana studied Czech language and literature and comparative literature at Charles University in Prague. She has been working at the Institute of Czech Literature since 2007 and was head of Czech Studies at the University of Oxford from 2014 to 2017. She has a lifelong interest in Czech avant-garde literature and has published a collection of poetry, I'll Let You in My House, and a novella, Little Eve, which was named one of the best books of the year in 2018 by a well-known Czech literary magazine. And Alex's translations include novels by Magdalena Placová, Bianca Belova, Petra Huvela, and Tomáš Meškel, among many others. He has also translated plays, subtitles, young adult and children's books, poems, philosophy, art history, and an opera. I am so pleased to have them here together in conversation. And now Zuzana and Alex.
Thank you, Pierce. Thank you, Brookline Booksmith, for having us. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We're going to start with a reading by one of you. So who would like to open the event by reading an excerpt from the novel for us? Oh, come on. We've been doing this at every event. And usually people are rushing the stage.
I can do it if
All
nobody
right.
else will. I need a mic. Okay.
Here we go, Sean. Do you want to sit or do you want to?
I can stand. Oh, you can get. I get a lectern.
Yeah.
Reading, so. The temperatures in recent days had climbed high above 30. The quiet of the baking hot afternoons was disturbed only by the intermittent cracking of desiccated tree bark. The animals lazed about, dumbstruck by the heat. Painfully, the birds managed to unglue their scorching beaks, peeping faintly and solely when absolutely necessary. Without moisture to deliver the scent of the moldy undergrowth, the forest no longer smelled sweet. Practically all the senses were killed, the drought was so extreme. People moved slowly, but even so, every lift of the hand, every step, made them break out in sweat. Their armpits pooled with sweat, but their foreheads were bone dry. The sun drank up every drop. Only under their hair and in the rolls of fat on the backs of their necks did a greasy sweat condense, stained grayish black by the dirt on their skin or the collar of their shirts. The only place Bohumil and Bohumila could breathe was at home. Along with the secrets of the dwelling's former inhabitants, the thick walls retained the chill of long, hard winters from days gone by. When Bohumil laid his hand on them, he had the impression he felt a gentle shiver. It was only an illusion, though, a trick played on the senses by the outdoor temperature running up against the heavy bricks. Even this heat was no threat to them, yet because it had lasted now for so many weeks, it was encroaching, despite the additional layers of plaster, to the point they could practically touch it. The bricks seemed almost to be wriggling, smirking. Their faint laughter was the dark shiver he felt tickling in the palm of his hand, or his whole back glued to the wall in an effort to cool off a bit. They had heard it said their house was sick, but they didn't know in what way or with what. Some claimed it was only because it was built at the ravine's bottom. A bumpy road led to it, plunging down into deep burdocks and tick-infested ferns after the last cottages. It's a sick home where the sun doesn't shine. The cottage sat so deep in the ravine that it had never heard of the sun. An old spruce tree stood blocking out the sun's rays. No one had ever attempted to chop it down. Its roots stretched too deep, beyond a safe depth for the human intrusion of pickaxes and shovels. Those centuries-old twisted claws, sheltering clusters of earthworms, speedy centipedes, and lazy blind beetles, alongside thigh bones and human skulls, formed the home's foundations. The roots were the home. Those fleshy shoots were the home's vascular system, and if they had been torn out, the house would have dried up and crumbled to dust. Even if someone had mustered the courage and ruthlessly felled the tree, so deep was it positioned within the ravine that no one in the cottage would have had to shield their eyes. Perhaps only in the morning at the fleeting blink of daybreak, when even the sun was still half asleep and didn't rightly know itself which way it was looking, it might have boyishly licked at the rusty ledge outside the bedroom window. But the old spruce is still there, its thick, heavy branches quietly birthing male and female cones. The pollination drop flows lazily down the cones, the pollen penetrating the ovule with cool deliberation. What's the rush? The cone haltingly unfolds its scales, and the winged seeds go helicoptering off in the wind. There were new saplings growing around the cottage all the time. They would dry out or rot away. The home's current inhabitants occasionally beheaded them all at a single swoop with a single feeble blow. So weak were the stems that even the mere push of a child's hand was enough to break them. The home received its occupants with sleepy indifference. No one told Bohumil the house was sick. They kept it a secret from Bohumila that anyone who unpacked their duvets and chipped mugs onto the shelves here fell ill, passed away, or had to start playing the game.
Thank you to Sean for being so brave. I kind of love that. So I have the first question. I did not think about how to juggle these things. Okay, so Playing Wolf is technically not out yet. It releases on Tuesday, so it's a special treat to have you both and to have access to books pre-publication. Because of that, I'd love for the two of you to start by telling us a little bit about the novel. Zuzana, can you tell us what led you to write this particular story, which is unlike your other work? And Alex, I'd also love to hear how the book made its way to you and what in particular attracted you to it. I'll have Zuzana start.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today. So thank you very much for having me. It sounds like a very easy and obvious question. How did you write it and why? But it's very hard for the author to come back at the very beginning and put a finger on the single idea or a single motif or why I came up with such a story. I think, or I can share with you only that I really started with the very first chapter. I didn't do any editing towards the end, and it really started with the image of the birth of the cow. I am a girl from the city. I don't have any kind of experience with that. So I can't even answer the question why it had to start with this particular scene. I just have a feeling that I was always interested in this connection between human being and animals, and whether the line between them is really so strict, or it can be a little bit blurred. And I kept asking myself the question whether in humankind there is an animal or the other way around. And probably the book can be read also as, to some extent, as the answer for these kind of my questions. But honestly, this is something that I can postpone. You know, it's just I didn't think about it at the very beginning. It was just a pure joy to start writing this story.
So how did I come to the book, or how did the book come to me? So Zuzana and I had met through her husband, who was a consulting on a translation that I did for the Charles University Press in Prague, a translation of a novel by a writer named Josef Jedlička, and I guess put us in touch. And Zuzana still is, interested in a modernist writer from the early to mid 20th century, Milada Sochkova, and asked me to translate a piece of a 6,000 word poem for her to use in a talk that she was giving in New York. So that's how we actually first met. And then I don't know, I don't know the dates of the issuing of your other books, but when Zuzana wrote this book, her publisher, who I had been in contact with about other authors and other books, wrote to me, emailed me to ask if I could translate a sample of the book for the press to pitch to publishers, English language publishers. I wasn't available to do that. One of the presses that Veronika Chalkova sent the book to was Catapult. Catapult, so this is a common thing in publishing, that when they receive a pitch for a book that's written in a language other than English, they ask somebody to do what's called a reader's report, which is kind of like, it's basically a book report, but also includes, for instance, thoughts about how the book does or doesn't fit into the publisher's program, which if you were writing a book report in high school, you wouldn't do that. So that's the last time I wrote a book report anyway, maybe. So I did the reader's report and did recommend the book, and then Catapult offered it, offered to you and Veronika, and then to me. What attracted me to the book, well, partly so I'd already worked with Zuzana, so I knew she was a solid person and a good person to work with, which matters. And then after that, it was really mainly the Little Red Riding Hood theme, which weaves its way through this novel. Those were the main things, yeah.
Thank you both. So in the description of the book, it's described as a horror novel perfect for fans of Midsommar and The Witch. I know the two of you don't write that marketing copy, have anything to do with that marketing copy. But naming those two films in particular, I think, in a book description is kind of catnip for horror fans, and it hints at the ways that the novel blends elements of horror, folk stories, psychological thrillers. And Zuzana, I'd love to know at what point those elements came into the novel. Did you purposely set out to have those horror elements? And at what point did Little Red Riding Hood come into the story?
So I am still convinced that I haven't written a horror. And the reason for that is I didn't think about it when I was writing. I didn't think about the genre. And actually, neither did the readers in the Czech Republic. It is read completely differently. It immediately got the label village novel because it takes place in a village. And sometimes I felt that the reviewers were sort of dumb, right? They didn't look any deeper into the genre. And then, to my surprise, the first translation was in French, in a very intellectual publishing house, and they read or advertised my novel completely differently. And they, on the book cover, they claim that it's actually, to some extent, an analogy of contemporary society, asking the question where the evil is, whether it is within us or outside, whether it is sort of sitting, in the room of people, or it's actually hidden in the woods. So they read it much more intellectually. And then came the English edition, and it was immediately labeled as a horror, to my surprise, actually. So I know that because we've been on a tour with Alex, and there were a lot of readers there, and they are right that there are elements of horrors, of some parts that they are like spooky, that they are a little bit like strange. We very often use the word uncanny, but this is something that I love about getting the book translated. That you see that not only every reader reads the book differently, but also every nation, sort of like reads the story differently. So for me, it's not the horror, but please enjoy the horror.
I do want to add that somewhere along the way this week, one of my friends, when I shared with them what you said about the French reviewers, how did you put it, viewed it as a metaphor for society and where does evil come from, said, yeah, that's what horror is.
And at what point did Little Red Riding Hood come into the story?
It was again very natural. Because I am the author that I don't have a plan when I'm writing. I'm in the process of writing, and then come the ideas. And I think that it's just stems from the story itself, because there is actually a woman, there is a wood, there is a fear of wolf, and it all just came together. And because I was always like interested in like fairy tales and different stories, and I do have two small kids, I dig a little bit deeper, and I realized that there are a lot of alternatives of these stories. And so I found the stories, French stories from the 17th century, they have a completely different narrative. There are no morals, no happy endings, basically, just a girl that's been told not to go into the woods. She did it anyway, and she died there. So this is the first sort of story. And I just got fascinated by it, and I dig deeper into Czech literature as well, and folk literatures and folk stories, and I love this part of the writing process.
And Alex, you said that was something that brought you to this novel, that made you want to translate it. Why do you think that is?
This isn't therapy.
I charge by the hour.
Okay. I'll make it quick then. I think it wasn't necessarily the Little Red Riding Hood per se, but the fact that Zuzana weaves in different versions of Little Red Riding Hood. So, there's this word intertextuality, and I actually, sitting here right now, it occurs to me, the first really big novel I translated was a novel by Joachim Topol, which in English was called City Sister Silver, which was loaded with quotations from other books, but misquoted intentionally, because the characters in the book were constantly quoting literature to each other, but didn't know what the hell they were talking about. But that meant I had to look up the actual quote and see what it was correctly, and then mangle it somehow in a way that was similar to the way the character mangled it. And this was in 1999, so the internet and search functions weren't then what they are now. So that took a lot of time, and I guess I enjoy that. But in this case, the texts were all named in advance, and I didn't have to translate them because they were all I used pre-existing English translations, and Angela Carter was already written in English. But I think it was more, maybe not the Little Red Riding Hood per se, but the different versions of it that I thought was interesting.
And so, as Zuzana says, it's not a horror novel. But Alex, did the fact that it has elements of horror change your approach to translating it? Did you do research in the genre to nail some of the intricacies of horror? The novel's very atmospheric and it has a lot of natural tension and chill that I would imagine is a challenge to capture.
Yes, so to counter the idea that it's a horror, I mean, the short answer to your question is no. And I have translated what I would call an actual horror novel. It wasn't published. Sometimes people find me through my website and Czech authors email me to ask if I'll translate their books, and usually the answer is no. A, I don't have time. B, my rate is too high for you. And as soon as I quote them my rate, they don't write back, so usually I just don't write them back in the first place. But there was one author who wrote to me who wrote a young adult horror novel, a collection of horror stories. And you know what, I guess actually, okay, I'm gonna back up. I read a lot of horror when I was younger. You know, everything from, well, that's not horror really. I can't think of the authors' names, but I was one of those people who definitely read Stephen King in the early days, let's say, for instance. And I don't know, I read Helter Skelter when I was 10 years old, and The Exorcist when I was 9, and that kind of thing. I know The Exorcist is technically not a horror novel. But anyway, so I guess I do have some interest in horror going way back. And I used to make friends with the monster under the bed so that he wouldn't kill me at night. So there is that too. But, and I was reading horror was the way I convinced the monster under the bed that I was on his side so he didn't need to get me. So there was the therapy session. But, I completely forgot what I was going to say. Where was I going with that? Help, anyone?
Atmosphere.
Yeah. Oh, the young adult book.
Oh,
yeah, which was actually a horror novel. And for that book, yeah, I did have to, it was completely obedient to the genre, all the conventions. So I had to figure out or look up, like, what is the most stereotypical way to say that somebody's got an evil in their eye? Is it a glint, a spark, a flash? You know, I think glint is the one people use the most often. And you could search Google Books in quotation marks to find that kind of thing. So that was, but this is a very creative novel. And in fact, you know, what I told Zuzana is I think, you know, this is the most creatively written novel that I've translated by a living Czech author alongside Joachim Topol. And so it's, in that sense, got nothing to do with horror, which usually relies very heavily on stereotypical language and imagery as well. That's not this novel.
No, it's definitely not. Zuzana, could you, again, because the book isn't out yet, so most of these good folks have not had a chance to read it, can you just give us a brief overview of the plot of the novel?
On the other hand, I found, well, it you know, there is a story, of course, but when I think about the novel, I don't really think about the plot, because sometimes when I summarize it for myself, it sounds a little bit silly. So put it a little bit more interesting. It's about a couple who that left Prague or the city to village in order to sort of like get something back in their marriage. They are going through some problems, but it's not about their marriage. It's not about the couple. It's for me more about the relationship between the village and villagers, and the people. They are coming there because they represent something new, something foreign, something strange, and they are like, sort of like penetrating something that is known for the villagers, right? So this is this kind of like pressure or tension that I was mostly interested in. And of course, the villagers are, not of course, my villagers are not nice people. They have, you know, some plans, and they actually happen to realize these plans. So you will find out soon.
So as we've discussed, there's a lot about the novel that's dark, but the writing is also very beautiful, and Zuzana is a poet, and it absolutely shows. Alex, are there some translations that you're most proud of that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. I don't know if this is the most poetic part, but yeah, I will read a passage. I don't think this needs introduction, but this is from partly inside Bohumila's head. Okay. He caught up with her easily, but as he tackles her to the ground, she could feel the exertion in his arms and legs. First the fight, then the chase. He must be exhausted too. Bohumila's arms had seized up in a strange cramp. He pushes down on her head, part of a root indenting itself into her face like a knife into hardened butter. She doesn't struggle or thrash about, just strains back against him. She feels his fingers sink into her hair. She's unable to focus on anything. Now he's whispering into her ear. She doesn't understand a word, but she can hardly ask him to repeat it. She just tenses up again, flexing all her muscles so he'd have to tear them apart if he wanted to get inside her. Her face hardens into a waxen mask. No longer even blinking, the veins in her eyes quietly burst. She doesn't register anything, focusing all her strength on the tension in her body, trusting it now as her only possible means of salvation. Wedged against her left cheek is a piece of root or branch. She is paralyzed with pain, and it hasn't even begun yet. It doesn't make sense. What was crystal clear a few moments ago, that intoxicating moment of freedom and sigh of relief, even that doesn't make sense anymore. It's all collapsing in on itself. She feels totally empty. The solid structure of the outside world is starting to blur, everything reduced to what she perceives through her senses. It's all happening too fast. She needs him to slow down, everything around her to slow down. She needs to be able to take a breath in peace and quiet, to calm down and start thinking logically again. She opens her mouth to ask him to stop, but all that comes out is an unintelligible rasp. When he knocked her down, she cracked a front tooth. She hadn't even noticed, but the rasping isn't from that. It's some freaking act of revenge by nature for this violence. She can sense it rising up against her, rousing itself for whatever it has in store for her. Bohumila knows that the whirling and the rasping, the only sounds she is capable of, are the sounds of the slippery roots excitedly coiled around her, the groans of the ancient tree trunks, coursing with thick, hot sap. And this is me, she thinks to herself, a wreck of personal physical pain. To hell with it all.
Wow. Really feel the rhythm there. I can see why you picked that passage. But speaking of rhythm, I would love to hear it in Czech. Can we do that reading now? Yeah.
So what we plan to do is that I read a short part in Czech, because there are some people that can read Czech or understand Czech. Then the same part will be read by Alex in English. And then it was suggested that we can read together. All right, I'll be reading in Czech and Alex will be reading in English. Let's try to compare it. Ještě než vystřelil, věděl, že ji trefí. Sledoval je dlouho, desítky týdnů. Znal přesné pořadí jejich pohybů, přikrčení, švih ušima a dlouhý skok, který kormidluje oháňkou. Nenechá se zmást. Musí mířit na opačnou stranu. Liška neprchá tam, kam mrskne ocasem. Na začátku léta ji přes obilí nebylo skoro vidět. Nalité stvoly se jen tu a tam zavlnily, jak mezi nimi probíhalo. Avšak teď už je vše posekáno. Ze žlutavé pšenice zbylo jen holé strniště, kostřičky stonků škrábou a píchají, i lišku občas zatlačí do hebkých břížek zadních běhů. Liška je vidět až od lesa. Běhá polem jako nahá. Jistě, že ji zkoušel vábit. Nosíval v kapse u kalhot zajčí vřeštidlo, i když se jen tak procházel bez psa a pušky, sám, bez úmyslu lovit, pískal a lákal tu zpropadenou lišku umělým nářkem poraněného zajíce. Vyzitkovala si své teritorium od lesa až skoro k rybníku. Liščí trus s výměšky žláz nacházel pravidelně u velkého kamene kousek od jezera, kam v době tání sahala voda. Teď v létě byl však kámen suchý a vyhřátý. Vodní hadi se na něm sušily své skřehlé krky. Několikrát i u jezera zahlédl. Snad 2x, 3x se oháňka myhla proti slunci, pár chloupků z ocasu se zachytlo o starý pařez. Myslivecký instinkt mu napověděl, že je to fena. Ještě než vystřelil, věděl, kam ji trefí. Do nohy. Vypískla a sklíčeně se odvlekla mezi stromy, jak jen jí to po třech šlo, zanechávajíc za sebou krvavou stopu. Pokoušela se nekvílet, tušila, že ji lovec následuje. Rána krutě bolela. Snažila se běžet rychle, po chvíli ale musela zpomalit. Noha mohutně krvácela a se zasáhl žílu. Motala se jí hlava a chvilkami vypadávalo vidění. Jsem ještě v lese nebo už u jezera? Liška hledá prázdnou noru, vyhrabanou pro tyto účely. Vydává se opačným směrem, než kde má ukrytá štěňata. Ve srázu u jezera, tam jsou schovaná. Ne tady pod tím pařezem, tím mizerou. Jen si pro mě přijď. Stáhni mě z kůže, vytáhni mi vnitřnosti, jestli mě chceš sežrat nebo vycpat. A jestli mě pro nic nepotřebuješ, a zabil si mě jen proto, že se už chvíli známe, chvíli pozorujeme, chvíli naháníme, chvíli chceme, nech mě sknít tady v noře, v křečích samotnou, protože já vím, usmála se Liška přes všechnu bolest, že stejný osud je vyrytý i v tvých špinavých prackách.
Even before he fired, he knew he was on target. He had been watching her for months now, week after week. He knew the exact order of her movements, the crouch, then the flick of the ears, then the long leap steered by her tail. He wouldn't be fooled. He had to aim in the opposite direction. Her tail swished one way, but she fled the other. At the start of the summer, it had been almost impossible to spot her through the grain. All he saw was the swollen stalks rippling back and forth as she raced across the field. But now it was all mowed. There was nothing left of the golden wheat but a bare stubble field, the skeletons of the blades scraping and pricking. Even the fox at times felt him pressing against the soft pads of her hind feet. He could see the fox all the way from the woods, running around the field naked. Of course he had attempted to lure her. He carried a hair call in his pants pocket. Even when he was just out for a walk with no dog or rifle, alone, with no intention of hunting, he would tempt the blasted fox with the cry of a wounded hare. The fox marked its territory from the woods almost all the way to the pond. He regularly found fox droppings with glandular secretions by the big rock a short way from the lake, where the water reached in times of thaw. In summer, though, the rock was dry and warm from the sun, and the water snakes lay out on it to dry their stiffened necks. He had spotted her by the lake several times, a bushy tail flitting against the sunlight 2 or 3 times, a few hairs from the tail snagged on an old stump. His hunter's instinct told him it was a vixen. Even before he fired, he knew where he would hit her, in the leg. The fox let out a shrill cry, and tail between her legs, limped off through the trees as fast as her 3 legs could carry her, leaving behind a trail of blood. She tried not to whine, assuming the hunter would follow. The pain was severe. She did her best to move at a swift clip, but after a while she had to slow down. Her leg was bleeding heavily. She probably hit a vein. Her head was spinning and her vision was fading in and out. Am I still in the forest, or am I at the lake? Looking for an empty den, dug precisely for moments like this, she headed in the opposite direction from where she'd hidden her pups. In the slope overlooking the lake, not under that stump, you bastard. Go ahead and come for me if you want. skin my hide, tear out my guts if you want to eat me or stuff me. And if you don't need me for anything, then the only reason you've killed me is we've known each other a while, watching each other, chasing each other, wanting each other, then leave me to rot here in this den, racked with spasms and all alone, because I know, the fox smiled despite the pain, that the same fate is also inscribed on your dirty paws. The fox crawls bleeding into the den with a hunter right behind.
že nemůže
Pain has
běžet.
slowed her down so much
Stále
that
jde
even
krokem
though
a
Slava is
přesto se
moving in a
vzdálenost
walk,
mezi liškou
the
a lovcem
distance between
zmenšuje.
hunter and fox is shrinking.
Se mnou
No
se
one is
nikdo
going to
nebude
play games
hrát,
with me, he
nahodí si
thinks,
pušku
hefting the
zpátky
rifle
na
onto
rameno.
his shoulder.
Se mnou
No one
si
is going
nikdo
to play
nebude
games
hrát
with
tak,
me
jak já
unless I
nechci.
want them to. I've
Sleduju
been
tě
trailing you
týdny,
for weeks,
směj se
you
mi
laughing at me
podrezaně
under your
fousky.
rust-colored whiskers,
Škálíš
teasing
a
and
zlobíš
taunting
a
and playing
lumbačíš,
troops, but
ale
I'm going
vyhraju
to
já.
win. My
Pomáhá se mi
binoculars
daleko.
must have a screw
Zdálo
loose, I
se mi, že
thought,
si
as
zvedla
I
pravou
raised her right
packu
paw
a
and waved.
zamával.
I must
Muselo
have
se mi to
imagined
zdát,
that Slava
říká si
thing.
Sláva.
I thought
Jak
I
se mi
saw you
mávla,
waving,
usmála
flashing
se
me a
svýma
smile with your
žlutýma,
yellow rock
zkaženýma
teeth as you
zobkama
leaped out of range.
a odskočila z dostřelu.
But my aim
Ale
is
já
true, it
mířil
always
dobře,
is.
mířím vždy
When
dobře.
the bullet dinged the
Cukla
bone,
si tou
you
prackou, když ti
recoiled
kulka
your
zazvonila
paw,
o kost, jako by se
as
za
if
ní
you were
styděla.
embarrassed, hiding it under
Schovala
your
se si
tummy.
pod pupek. Takhle
This is
mávám
me
já,
waving,
má
my
milá.
dear,
Tady
standing
stojím,
here,
nad
looking
tebou
down
teď
at you.
stojím. To
I'm
já se
smiling
usmívám
under
pod
my beard.
fousy.
I
Jsem
know I'm
starý,
old.
to vím.
My wrinkles are
Jeskyní
like
malby
cave
jsou moje
paintings.
vrásky,
My
jako
legs look
zafačovaný
like a
mumie
mummy's when
vypadají
I
moje
crawl out of
nohy,
bed in the
když
morning,
lezu ráno z
but never
postele.
underestimate
Však
an old
nepodceňuji
hunter,
starého
dear
otce
fox.
liško.
It
Ne,
isn't
to
just
nejsou
experience
zkušenosti a
and
vytrvalost,
endurance, it's
to je
the
celá
whole
historie
history of killing.
zabíjení. Trofeje a
Stuffed
dvojitá
trophies and
obálka
double-ordered
skleněných
glass
očí
eyes
pro
when the hunt is a
vycpání,
success.
když se
It
opět
isn't
daří.
just wetting
To nejsou jen
twigs in
větvičky
the womb.
zatlačené do rány,
That's
to je neúcta
disrespect
ke
for
smrti,
death,
pohrdání
contempt for
bolestí.
pain. Your
Tvoje
hot
horká
blood
krev
smells
nevoní
to me
stejně
like
jako
a
rohlíky
rohlíky
od
at Bubbles
bubliny,
shop,
všedně
ordinary
a
and
levně.
cheap. I'm
Takhle
waving at
mávám
you,
a ty se
hunched on the
krčíš
ground
pode mnou
like a
jako
squirrel
veverka,
caught stealing.
jako
My
sisel
eyes
chycený
may
při
be
krádeži.
old,
Moje oči jsou starý,
but the
ale puška
rifle
je
is new.
nová.
That was unexpected.
Thank you for humoring me.
Yeah, that was Pierce's idea.
I kind of loved it. Maybe next time a shorter,
Yeah.
because it's hard to keep in rhythm, the two of you. But that was very, very cool to hear. Thank you, Paul. So, as evidenced in that passage, Zuzana, there are sections that you've very interestingly crafted, like using this perspective of the fox as the narrator, just kind of seamlessly shifting into that. And then there's another section where you personify night. How did those come to you? When did they come to you? Tell us all about that.
So throughout the novel, there are a lot of parts where the character is alone, and the reader can get into the character or have the information about the character through inner monologues. And they were parts that I realized that I liked to have some sort of dialogue, but I didn't really want to have another person there. And then came the books, and they came in the night, and it was so liberating to realize that actually animals can talk, and things can talk, and things as well. And it was really lovely for me to sort of like cross this border, because it was very empowering for me, you know, in the creative process. And there was the other day we had a talk about it, a discussion about that, and we realized actually when we stop believing that animals can talk, when we stop believing that a table can have some ideas as well, because fairy tales are full of something that is not possible to happen and keeps happening, right? And when we were children, we believed that for sure, and we were wondering whether we were forced to, stop believing that, or this is just, something that grown-ups don't do anymore. And because it is actually about a fairy tale, my writing as well, it was really lovely to sort of stop respecting this kind of grown-up barriers and just put it out there and enjoy the process.
I can imagine also as an academic to write some fiction and to just completely throw out all of the rules is quite freeing. So I'd love to talk about the names a little bit. So our husband and wife have practically the same name, and then their child, who is kidnapped over the course of the novel, is just referred to as the boy. Can we talk about what led you to make that decision?
It sounds like a very interesting question, but I'm going to disappoint you very much, and Alex knows that already. So when he approached me about the names and how to translate them, he basically emailed me like, did you mean anything by that? And my answer, in short, was no. It was a joke at the very moment, at the very beginning, and I felt that I can always change it, throughout the process, and I just didn't. And getting back to the boy, it's also, a little bit, but I'm gonna be very honest. It's just that I didn't come up with a good name, so it's a boy.
Alex, can you tell us what your response was to that answer of, no, I just, those were the ones I put in and I never changed them. Did you want to mess with the names, Alex?
Well, she didn't tell me that at the time. She just said that there wasn't any deeper meaning to the names. Yeah. So, but I had spent some time with my spouse on a car trip thinking of possible male and female names in English that could still be attached to Czech people that had male and female versions. If you were to translate them, the closest direct translation, so to speak, would be Theodore and Theodora. Somebody loving God, or I guess loved by God. But that would have attached, a much deeper meaning to the names than they had. So just left it. And I didn't end up thinking that much about it either in the end.
And yet all of the villagers have very distinct names and even nicknames, and they laugh and they're confused by the fact that Bohumil does not have a nickname, that he just uses that name wherever he goes. Any insight there?
Well, I think I don't have any particular experience with in the village, but I have a friend who has a cottage, so I've been there. I visited a village, I can say, and I realized that actually nicknames are much more common. I would say that in the city, because they are probably they live much closer to each other. They just know each other a little bit more. And Bohumil is a person from the city, and we just don't do it. And especially in, Bohumil can be a very, I would say, a common name in a little bit different variation, and it would be Bohos, right? It's just something that it's like very colloquial, very spoken language, but he refuses to use that, right? So I think that I just use it as another example to show how different they are.
That's fascinating, thank you. So the two of you have been on tour, and you've had lots of opportunities to talk to each other, have people ask you questions. Is there something that you would like to have said or talked about the two of you that has not been asked yet?
There actually haven't been that many questions about the different versions of Little Red Riding Hood. And I don't know, but I think that's because people haven't read the book yet. So how would you know?
So tell us a little bit about the versions.
That's what I get. So, well, there's the first version, which was published in French, and I think it was 1697. I mean, there were earlier, this is an oral story. The first time it was put down in writing, as far as we know, I think. was by this Frenchman named Charles Perrault in 1697 as part of this Tales of Mother Goose, as we know it in English. This is the one where I guess the mother gives the girl the cakes or whatever they are, or biscuits, to bring to her grandmother in the woods, and she meets the wolf, and the wolf says, do you want to go down the path of pins or the path of needles? And I don't remember what she chooses in that story, but she gets eaten and dies. And then there's the Brothers Grimm version where there's a hunter who comes along and saves the girl, kills the wolf. And then there is, I guess there were two different versions of that second one. I would have to go back and look
In
again.
Czech tradition, we added the grandma. The first is the grandma who's being eaten by wolf, and then
it
it's so
takes her
strange
place,
because
right.
they actually the wolf, like eats her and put her. Well, it's a cup and it's glasses and her nightgown. I don't know. Do you have the same here?
Yes,
Really?
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
And how does it end? Like, is there a hero man that saves them both?
Yes.
Do you have this?
He cuts them out.
Yeah,
of
he
the
cuts
wolf's
them out.
stomach.
Okay.
Yeah, that's in there. And then there are the, I think I can't remember right now, it's either 2 or 3 short feminist versions of Little Red Riding Hood by Angela Carter, a British writer. But the thing is, those aren't in the novel in full, and words and phrases from those versions are woven into the narrative. So if you pay attention now, that's like the biggest spoiler I'm going to give you tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. We're going to turn it over to audience questions. Is anyone, okay, that was quick. A burning question.
Hi, I actually have a question for each of you. The first is, you mentioned that in different cultures they had different interpretations of the story. So first is to ask you, as a translator, do you feel like your interpretation as you're reading the original plays into how you interpret it, and then that goes into that culture? I don't think he realizes I'm talking to him.
Oh, sorry.
It's reading my. So my question for you was, do you feel that as an interpreter, your interpretation of the original text plays into how then that culture is then receiving that story? Does that, do you think, play into how different cultures have different interpretations? Do different translators lend a different voice?
How could they not? Yeah. So, I can't change what Zuzana wrote. So, but we also had this conversation earlier. I was on a translation residency some years ago and decided that English had it all wrong, and actually what simultaneous interpreters do should be called translating, and what literary translators do should be called interpreting, because that's what we do. But I did start a movement to make that happen, so we're stuck with the words we have now. But you used the word interpreting just now. So yeah, another translator would interpret some things differently than me, but I don't think it would be enough to fundamentally change the basic dynamic or impact or effect of the novel. I don't think.
One more question to go along with that. So different languages tend to, for instance, some other languages just saying the same phrase or the same idea tends to be more flowery or romantic or drawn out or done in a different way. Do you think that part of it gets lost where English is a newer, more modern language? And is it always quite as flowery or romantic or lend these kind of ideas in text?
Well, again, so this is where you have to be a reader. So I have to have read some number of Czech works and watched movies, cartoons, read children's books to recognize, at least on some basic level, what kind of stylistic effect is happening. Now, I'm not always, I'm translating a novel, not a novel, a book right now with an editor who knows English very well, but is Czech. And, she does interpret things differently from me sometimes. And I'm not saying I never make mistakes. I certainly wouldn't ever say that. But, I had a Czech teacher early when I was first learning Czech who said to me, he was Czech, when you're translating, your goal should be to have the same impact on the English-speaking reader as the book or what text had on the Czech-speaking reader, but what impact it has on you is different from her and from him and them, and do you know what I'm saying? There's, I would say like the main difference is as a reader you can interpret it any way you want, and I can't interpret it any way I want because I have to somehow render this text, and I'm not going to use the word faithfully but convincingly, which is a word that Catherine Silver used as a replacement for that idea that there was some kind of like hierarchy there.
Yeah, I wasn't blaming you. I'm just thinking you must see yourself in the text.
Yeah, I know, and I know I have some tics. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but yeah, I have my own personal preferences for some things. I mean, sometimes I'm very intentionally aware of them and I decide to do it differently, but sometimes I say like, it's fine.
And and this idea, so you said that you didn't see it as a horror, as people were perceiving it as. Did you see it as a metaphor, or did you see it as something else altogether?
Well, it's very hard for the author to interpret their own books, So, and throughout the tour, I realized that we have a tendency to over-interpret it, right? Like the names and the boy and everything, and it's kind of liberating for the author to say it doesn't have a meaning, right? Because not everything has to have a meaning within the book. So. No, not really. No.
Coming in the back.
Hi, thank you so much. Zuzana, just a question for you. You described your process of working on this text as an intuitive one, where you felt your way into the story and just followed it. I was struck by the translated passage that one of us, the audience, read early on, and the evocative language, the atmosphere of the language, and the tension in the phrasing, in the word choices that I was feeling. And I wondered from your standpoint, as you were feeling your way into this work as a story, you were also finding its language. What did you discover about this book's language?
Thank you for that. It's a beautiful question. Language is, and maybe this was the reason that I sort of like didn't want to answer what's the book about, because it's to some extent less important for me than how it is written, and thank you very much for saying that. Language is a crucial part for me in my writing, and I pay a very deep attention to it. And what I do, I write and I edit and I edit and I edit. And usually when I go back to my text and before I start writing, the story, how the story unfolds, I start with something that I've written previously and I read it out loud. And this is like a control for me to check whether the rhythm and whether the choice of words is actually fine for me. And I can share with you the very, I call it personally like an intimate moment, that when I finish a paragraph out loud for myself, and I have a feeling that I don't want to change anything, I don't want to erase anything, or I don't want to add anything, then it's done.
think that's a beautiful place to end on. Let's do one last round of applause. Wonderful. So we're gonna have a signing. We have some wine to celebrate this occasion. Books are in the back. We're gonna have the signing line snake along here. And I'll go open up the wine. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you.